Hi everybody. Welcome to this month's Portals Community Call. I'm Jason Comfort from MS Dynamics World. Always happy to be here for another one of our monthly events. We have with us, as usual, Nicholas Hayduke from Engineered Code. I'll let him introduce himself and sort of take things away here in just a moment. But before he does, just a couple of housekeeping points first. We do welcome your questions during these events. Look for the questions block in the webcast interface, and we'll be keeping an eye on that as we go. Nick always does a great job doing that even as he presents. And we are recording today's event, so if you miss any part of it, you can be on the lookout for that afterwards as well. So without any further delay, Nick, I'm going to hand things over to you.
All right, thank you, Jason. Let's get going. Yeah, welcome everyone. Today's primary topic is user registration. We've got a lot to get through. We've got some release notes that have come out since we last chatted. So let's get going. I think we've got lots to cover today. Okay, a quick introduction. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. My name is Nicholas Hayduke. I'm the president and a software engineer with Engineered Code based here in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. I'm a Microsoft MVP that with a focus in Power Pages. I've been working with the product ever since it was created at ADX Studio, again here, right here in Regina. So I've essentially devoted my career to this product. So happy that you're able to join us today and kind of showing some interest in the product that I've had the pleasure and sometimes not so pleasure of working with over the last few years. So if we're not already connected on LinkedIn, please feel free to reach out to me there and connect. Otherwise, if you're interested in any of the content that we produce related to Power Pages, you can follow us on X. You can check out our blog, which I do about once a month. You can check out our YouTube channel, which hosts not only these recordings but also our weekly tips, as well as you can check out the podcast that I co-host with George Dubinsky over at crm.audio, where again all that content focused on Power Pages. As always, just want to say thanks to Jason and the team at MS Dynamics World for all of their support over the years. I think we're close. I think this might be number 70 in terms of these community calls. So great partnership, great collaboration, and appreciate everything that they do over there to support our community initiative and lots of other things that they do to support the community as well. So thank you to Jason. Um, Again, in terms of agenda, lots of news. Not only did the product team have some blog posts, but we've also had the release wave, the 2026 release wave one plan has been released, and lots of things to discuss there for Power Pages. Again, then we'll get into our topic for today, which is user registration. We'll then talk about the date and time of our next community call, and then we will hopefully have some time for some Q&A. So let's get right into that news. So there have been a few things outside of the release notes that I want to talk about. Um, there's now governance for if a dev, like a developer site or a trial site, is able to be made public. So as an administrator within the Power Platform Admin Center, you can make it so that your makers can't make development or trial sites public. You can control that. You can make that kind of a broad no sites, only certain sites, not all sites except for certain sites, or none. So you have that governance control within the Power Platform Admin Center. If you're doing work with the U.S. government cloud, the Gen AI search and the data summarization is available there. And then server logic is generally available. So I know that that's a big feature. We've had some clients that we've been working on some projects that leverage that. So it's great to see that that's officially supported now in production. And so that's a big thing. I think that was our topic last month. If you're involved in Power Pages and you haven't looked at server logic, now is the time. It is a big step in the right direction in terms of giving us the capabilities to do things that before were possible but took a lot of extra architecture. Now some of those things are just way easier now. So it's a huge step, and glad to see it's generally available. Okay, so let's look at the release wave. So For those of you maybe new to the ecosystem, what Microsoft does is every kind of breaks the year up into 2 release waves. So release wave 1 goes from April until September, and so 2026 release wave 1 will go kind of started beginning here of April and goes until the end of September, and then release wave 2 goes from October until the following March. So when we talk about the 2026 release wave 1, Microsoft, what they do is they release a plan. Used to be they would release the plan a few months in advance. Now they release it a little bit closer to the actual release wave itself. But we can kind of get a sense of what to expect over the next 6 months. A couple things I want to just kind of reiterate. Just because this is not the complete list of everything that you would see with regards to Power Pages. If we go back to the previous slide where I had some news, many of those things may not have been on the release notes. So this is just, generally it's a subset of the things we can expect. And sometimes these things change. So just because it's on here, sometimes it will change. But I would say for the most part, we do generally see if they put it in the release notes, those are the ones that they're quite confident of in terms of delivering. So it's a pretty good idea of what we're going to see, but this is not all we're going to see. We'd expect to see quite a bit more than this, actually. So just kind of quickly going through the list here, and this is only the first page of the list. We got two slides for this because there were so many things. There's functionality coming related to site analytics and server logging, basically an integration, it seems, with application insights. So the ability to add an application insights instance from Azure to your Power Pages site and have some of that logging kind of and analytics move over into application insights directly. There have been integration, like you could have always in the past added your application insights kind of tracking code to the site. So some of this is just making things easier, and I think it's just kind of a deeper integration as well, especially on the server side of things. There is an admin security agent that is kind of essentially actively monitoring traffic on the site. I think this one might be one of those where like there's been some announcements, maybe this one's going GA, but if you haven't already kind of looked at this, you can enable a security agent that can look for things like phishing or kind of can analyze the traffic and the content of your site, looking for kind of known patterns that you might want to be aware of, and then it can kind of notify you. So there's that admin security agent. They're going to provide granular control over authentication providers. So the ability to say, hey, there's like this one particular one I don't want to be enabled on certain sites, that sort of thing. Up until now, it's been kind of more kind of global, like, can this one use an external identity provider or not? This one, I think, will give you more granular controls. You'll be able to view certain performance metrics about Power Pages in the Monitor Hub. So the Monitor Hub is something kind of that exists right now. It just doesn't have much data related to Power Pages in it, so that's going to be added. There's going to be some options to configure security with an agent. So we've got, I talked about that other security agent that's working on protecting the public side of the site. There's also an agent within the Design Studio that can help you create the site, set up your security. And so this agent is aware of like what tables do you have, and it can help you set up permissions and web roles and all that sort of stuff. So some enhancements or some features around that. For OpenID Connect, I know they're working on enabling support for encrypted tokens. So while Power Pages itself does support OpenID Connect in general, there'd be kind of newer features of OpenID Connect that the team would have to be kind of adding over time. And so I think encrypted token support is one of those things that's expected to come. That way that, like right now, kind of historically, your token was encoded, but not necessarily encrypted. So if you do want that extra layer of security where your token is actually encrypted, Power Pages will begin to support that as well. Merging of web roles and security roles. That was something that was announced kind of previously, the fact that web roles and security roles, so security roles from Dataverse, web roles from Power Pages, there's going to be essentially kind of a syncing between them. Neither one is going away. Like, we're not losing web roles, but they're basically making it so that web roles will be also represented as security roles, and there's some things you can do there. So there's this kind of trying to unify Dataverse security with Power Pages security. And so I believe as part of this release wave, not like that's been available in private preview, but it will also be available at public preview, and I think generally available as part of this release wave as well. Going on to the next screen, a bunch of kind of generally available things. So there's been lots of announcements recently about AI coding tools specifically trained for Power Pages. So some of those will be going GA. We've got the GA of the client side client API. We've already talked about Server Logic. Server Logic has already been announced. There is the ability to create and delete websites using the PAX CLI. That will be important for organizations that have, sophisticated ALM processes that require you to, maybe it spins up a new environment and it creates, spins up your site if you want to create all those things kind of as part of your ALM process. So you'll have the ability to actually create and delete websites using the PAX CLI. And then the last one I have here on the list is Bootstrap version 5 and enhanced data model support for the D365 portal templates. So those have been supported in terms of creating new sites for a while. Based on my reading, I think this is going to support migration of those. So there are still certain templates that aren't supported for the migration of the enhanced data model. So I'm hoping to see support for those, because more and more we see clients. What we see a lot is clients who want to upgrade because of Bootstrap 5. And honestly, like the big effort with these upgrades of enhanced data model and Bootstrap 5 is the testing. You basically kind of have to hit almost every page, making sure everything's working fine. So if you're going to do that, you might as well do that for both the enhanced data model and Bootstrap 5. So I'm glad to see we can support, because a lot of the older portals, they were created with the D365 portal templates. So it's great to see the ability to kind of convert some of those older sites to use Bootstrap 5 and enhanced data model. So yeah, that's a lot of news for just a few weeks here since we last gathered. So lots of good things happening with Power Pages. Again, I'm super excited that the server logic is generally available and we can use that in production. We've got, like I said, even in the last few months, there's been a number of projects is like, yeah, we're gonna just do that and get server log, and let's hope that we, with server logic being in preview, because it just simplifies things quite a bit. So and yeah, I'm really excited to see how the community is going to start using the client API to see how, like, that's going to be a tough habit to break. I'm sure a lot of partners have invested in their kind of way of doing things for client side Power Pages JavaScript. So we'll see how quickly if there's a shift in the community to embracing that, or if there's resistance. I'm kind of curious to see how the client API will be going. I know our plan would be to, it's not going to be something that we'd recommend to a client that, hey, you have to change everything. But for new projects going forward, it does seem like it's the way to go. So, all right, why don't we move on, I guess, to today's topic, which is user registration. So, what do we mean by user registration? How does someone who's never been on my site before get into my site? They go to my site for the first time. How do they actually get an account to sign in? And of course, that word account means a bunch of different things. It's certainly, in this context, we're not going to talk about, it's not an account record in Dataverse. We're talking about when someone has the ability to be a user in Power Pages as a logged in user, they need to have two things. We need that person to have a contact in Dataverse. Every person logging into Power Pages has a contact in Dataverse. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. That is a requirement. And then somehow they need login credentials. Now, we'll see here there's actually kind of two flavors of that. They can either be local auth or they can be external identity. But it's true that they need a contact record and they need some sort of login credentials. Now, when we talk about user registration, again, we're talking about a new person coming to our portal. And so a new person coming to our portal might already have a Dataverse contact. Or they might already have login credentials for the identity provider that we're using. Or they may have neither. Like, there's all these different combinations, and we need to consider these scenarios. So when it comes to user registration, I wouldn't say that any one particular flow is necessarily overly complicated. What can be challenging is understanding there's all these different variables, identifying, okay, for a particular implementation, do we ever have to work with people where contacts exist already? Or is it true that contacts will always exist already? If that's true, then that just eliminates some of these options. But there are lots of different ways of doing it. And it is by looking at, does the contact already exist? Do they already have login credentials? By identifying those and kind of identifying those different kind of groups, we can then kind of design registration scenarios for those different users. So let's first look at the login credentials. So when we talk about login credentials, there's kind of two broad categories. So there's the local auth. We'll talk about why, it's been a super popular option over the years, but not something that's recommended. Or there's the external identity provider. And so that's when we're relying on some sort of other identity provider, whether it's Entra external ID, whether you're using something like Okta, Auth0, you're using Google, Microsoft, LinkedIn, Facebook, and you're hooking those up to Power Pages using OpenID Connect, SAML 2.0, OAuth 2.0, all these different kind of protocols. Those are all kind of broadly grouped into, hey, we have an external identity provider on our Power Pages site. We're going to kind of focus. We're going to talk a little bit about local auth because I know that causes confusion, and I know that there's people out there using it. But when it comes to an external identity provider, we're going to mostly to me, it's like Entra external ID is what I see a lot of people using, or Okta. Historically, it was Azure AD B2C. Those are the ones that we're gonna kind of focus on today, and they're all kind of roughly the same in terms of like the user registration process and what options we have. So let's talk a little bit about local auth. So with local auth, I said it's not recommended. Why do I say this? Microsoft at one point deprecated it. They had to kind of rescind that deprecation, but again, we still know that Microsoft would prefer that they'd love to be able to yank that out of there. So we do expect at some point Microsoft will remove that. So if you start with local auth right now, we'd expect you to have to transition, and an authentication transition project is never fun. So we say just set yourself up for success, pick something else. There's the options in terms of Entra external ID for kind of reasonable numbers of users. It doesn't cost anything. It's not too bad to set up. So try to stay away from local auth. Love it for like pre-production testing, that sort of thing, but in production, try and stay away from it. And the main reason I say stay away from it is, yes, Microsoft is deprecated, but also like Microsoft is not investing in local auth. They are, it's there, it works the way it works, but Microsoft isn't spending any time or money working on local auth. Whereas you've got the team over at Entra external ID or third-party services, like that's what they do. That's their job. That's what they do for a living. They're the ones coming up with new features for one-time passwords and multi-factor authentication, all these things that people are expecting from auth these days. Those teams are the ones working on it. The Power Pages team doesn't do that. They're hoping you just use those other kind of other ones. With local auth, the usernames and a hashed version of the password is stored in Dataverse on the contact table. And it is, like, one could argue that it's integrated a little bit nicer into the out-of-the-box registration experience. But again, for all those other reasons, we try to avoid it. Now, when we talk about an external identity provider, in this case, it can get kind of a little bit convoluted because you can use an identity provider, which then uses other identity providers. So, for example, B2C, Entra external ID, they are the single identity provider as far as Power Pages is concerned. But then within there, you can enable Google and Facebook and all these other ones. So, as an aside, I generally say, hey, with Power Pages, you want a single identity provider. So if you do want to support Google and Facebook and those other ones, use something like Entra external ID and then use that to then have those IDPs within there. Power Pages is it's gonna just be way easier in Power Pages if you have that single auth provider as Entra external ID, Okta, that sort of thing. But in this case, you're basically delegating the idea of usernames and passwords to that identity provider. Power Pages doesn't necessarily know what the username is, certainly doesn't know what the password is. At a bare minimum, we just get a unique identifier. Power Pages has that unique identifier of who that user is when they're logging in. We can trust that if we get a token that has that ID, we validate that token. again, all this happens automatically, but that's what's happening. You log into that other identity provider, you get a token that you can validate that says, hey, this user with this ID has logged in. And that's what's stored on the external identity table. So within Dataverse, the way that contacts are related to their login credentials is through that external identity table. And that external identity table is quite simple. It really kind of has 3 fields on it. It has a lookup to the contact, and so it's like, hey, this is it. It has a field that represents the ID of the user. Again, not necessarily a username. Most IDPs don't give you the username as their ID. There's some other kind of unique identifier for it. But basically, you're saying when you log in, the Power Pages code will say, okay, I've got this identity token. It has this user ID. I'm going to do a query in the external identity table for a user that has this one, and then the other column that it has is the identity provider. In case there's that user ID is used amongst multiple identity providers. So it says this identity provider has been used to log in. It has this ID. Those 2 things give you a unique external identity, and that has a lookup to the contact that person represents. So that external identity table is the link between the contact and the login credentials. So again, when we're talking about registration, we're talking about how does a user get a contact if they don't already have one? How do they log in and get credentials if they don't already have that? And how are we associating the contact to those credentials? So that's kind of the process of what we're talking about in terms of user registration. So again, there's lots of options in terms of, are we using local auth, external identity, contact with no contact. So the next thing we're going to talk about here is contact versus no contact. So if there isn't already a contact for the person, then that means the registration process needs to in some way create a contact. Because as I said at the beginning, Power Pages users, when you log in, you must have a contact. So if in your user registration process, you have people who don't already have contacts, the process needs to somehow create a contact and then somehow associate login credentials with that contact. If there is a contact already in Dataverse for that person, the registration process only needs to kind of gather the login credentials somehow and then associate with that contact. Now, of course, how do we validate that the person says who they are is who they are? We'll get into that. But again, the first question I always consider in my projects when we're talking about the user registration process is, can we assume that before a person comes into our Power Pages site, that the business has already interacted with them in some way? The organization already has probably a contact record for them, and if that's the case, then we need to build a process to associate those contacts with the person who's logging in. Because the worst thing you can do is not have that set up properly, and you have people who log in, and now you're going to have duplicates. Because if you allow someone to create a new contact when they already have one in the system, now you're going to get 2 different contacts for them, and that's going to be a nightmare to consolidate. So let's talk about the scenario first, where you're dealing with contacts, or you're dealing with people who don't already have contacts in the system. So this is that scenario. The solve to that is often called open registration. So open registration essentially means anyone can kind of give me, like, I can get login credentials for them, and once I have their login credentials, because they don't have a contact, I'm just going to create essentially a blank one for them. So let's look at this from the perspective of both local auth and if you're using an external identity provider. So from a local auth perspective, it works relatively seamlessly. You just say, hey, person, I want your username, password, email address, click submit. Now you're into the site. And what that's done is it's created a contact record. And as I mentioned earlier, with local auth, the login credentials are stored right on the contact. So there's not even an external identity provider. You simply got in a single request, you're creating a contact that has those login credentials on it. And the user's logged in, and they're just kind of immediately into the portal, in they go. Now, when it comes to the identity provider, if you're using an external identity provider, the flow's a little bit different because you don't click a button to register anything. What you do is if you have open registration enabled, the user just clicks sign in. They go over and they sign in using their that identity provider. They come back to the portal and they're just in. Like they never had to click register. They just sign in, and when they're returned back to the portal, if you have open registration enabled, basically the way it works is if you come in and it's like, hey, I've got this person who's signed in with this ID. I haven't mapped it to an external identity provider, or sorry, an external identity in Dataverse. That means they don't exist yet. I'm going to create that. I'm going to create them a blank contact. Now, depending on what identity provider you're using, that can allow anyone you want to just sign in and create blank contacts in Dataverse. In my experience, open registration is actually quite rare in terms of how often it's actually used. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it just because, again, in my experience, contacts usually already exist in Dataverse for Power Pages sites. Often you're dealing with businesses where they've already have an existing relationship with these people, so we'll see how we're going to handle that with invitation codes. Or there's still some sort of vetting of the people that they want to get in. So there's still some sort of application process. There's something more than just, no, I don't want them to just click a button and sign in with Facebook and all of a sudden they're into my portal. So open registration, it's an option, but in my experience, it's not as common as you might think. And so if you are in a situation where you think that you are going to be using open registration, to me, it's kind of like using global table permissions. It's like it's not that you never should, but if you do find yourself in that state, you have to kind of think, okay, why do I need this? Is there another option here? Because it's off. We see it often, like you either turned on unintentionally, not understanding what it is. With global permissions, it's like, hey, I couldn't figure out it, so I just put it in there, and off we went. And so again, with open registration, if you have open registration turned off, and a user goes to click the sign in link, and they go to an external identity provider, and they come back, and they don't, and they're not already in the system, they're just going to get an error message saying, sorry, like you can't log in. Like you've logged into the identity provider, but you don't get into the portal. Again, in my experience, for the most part, it's best to see if you can avoid open registration if possible. I see here I have a question from Jim. He says, if our Power Pages site is configured for Entra ID, so not external, but just regular Entra ID as the provider, does this allow for guest/external users? And if so, can those kinds of users self-register, or do they need to use the redeem invitation process? So that is a good question, Jim. I'm trying to decide if I want to handle this now. Yeah, I think I can. So the thing is, if you're using the out-of-the-box Entra ID that comes with pretty much every Power Pages setup, that's going to use an app registration that has certain restrictions. You can enable that for guest access. You'd have to find the app registration used by your Power Pages site, and you can enable it for guests. That doesn't change. Like they would still have to use the redeem invitation process if you don't have open registration. So whether you're using Entra ID or anything else, it doesn't really change the conversation about if they self-register or do they need to use the redeem invitation process. It really comes down to if you enable open registration, they would not need to. But it's the same as to even if they weren't a guest user, even if they're a regular user in your Entra ID, if you don't have open registration turned on, even a typical user in your Entra ID isn't going to be able to log into Power Pages without an invitation if you have open registration turned off. By default, open registration is turned on. So if you kind of spin up a new site, that's why anyone with Entra ID can kind of log in. But if you turn open registration off, Entra ID, it's not a special, like there's nothing special about it as an identity provider, so it doesn't change the open registration process or anything like that. It's treated no differently than any other identity provider. So, Jim, I hope that answered your question. If not, follow up and I'll get that answered. But I think Entra ID is just kind of pre-set up for you, but it's not special. It's not treated differently in terms of registration. Okay, so let's move on to, so again, if people don't have contact records, again, which sounds common, but in my experience is less common than you might expect, then open registration is an option. But right now I'm kind of referring to kind of the out of the box experiences. I'll also at the end here talk about some alternatives for if you're in a state where people still don't have contacts, alternative kind of preferred alternatives to open registration. Okay, next we've got invitation codes. Now, this could be a topic for a whole other call, and in fact, it was back in January 2021. And I don't know that anything has really changed in the last 5 years on this topic. So I don't want to spend too much time on this when you could, if this is something you want to dive deeper into, you could go watch that call. But I'll give just kind of a quick summary about what invitation codes are. So invitation codes are a process where and there's an actual table in Dataverse called invitation code. So what you do is you generate a record in that table, and it's related to a contact. So again, we have an existing contact. How do we get this a person to be able to log into our system, but associates them with this existing contact is by giving them this invitation code. So we generate the invitation code. There's a lookup to a contact. It gives them this kind of long, funny string of characters that gets sent to them via email. They click a link. That it goes to a special page where it's going to pre-fill their invitation code, and then they click the button to kind of sign in, essentially. Now, if it's local auth, it's going to get them to create a username and password. If it's going to go over to the identity provider, external identity provider, they're going to get taken to the sign-in page, where they can then sign in with that identity provider, and then when they come back to Power Pages, that the context of that invitation code is going to be kept, so that, again, remember, if it was open registration, if it came back and it said, hey, I don't have a contact, I don't have an external identity with that ID, I'm going to create them a blank contact. In the case of an invitation code, it's going to say, hey, I don't have to create a blank contact, I know which contact to associate them with. So again, the invitation code process is all about send them an email, they get a link with that code in it, they go through the process to essentially sign in with their credentials, and it links them to a contact, as opposed to the open registration where it will create a blank contact for them. Where this can get a little bit tricky is if the user doesn't already have an account with the identity provider, they need to create one, and we're going to talk about that in a second, because that is one of the trickiest user experience issues that we see kind of related to this user registration process in general. Just a quick note here, with invitation codes, there's also this concept of like group invitation codes. I just want to call out that is not for user registration. That's for, like, again, I don't know if I've ever used that on a project. I don't know that anyone has ever used that on a project. It's very, as far as I know, very rarely used, but that's not related to user registration. It's more about distributing web roles. So when you see group invitation codes, just don't think of it for user registration. People sometimes will get confused and think, hey, I want to invite 20 people to my portal, I'll use a group invitation code. That's not what it's for. So again, invitation codes are the traditional way to say, hey, I created a new portal. I've got 1,000 contacts that I want to invite. So I generate an invitation code for all of them. I send them an email. They get this nice email that says, welcome to my new portal. Click this link. They go through the process to sign in, and they've had the opportunity to create their usernames and passwords in the identity providers. They log in, and it associates them with their existing contact record. That is, I would say, the most common way that we see it done, is that for the most part, again, for organizations where contacts generally already exist in Dataverse, because often, like, this will be like a post-sales thing. So it's like, well, we already had them in as a lead or as part of an opportunity. So by the time they get to our portal, we already know who they are, and we already have a contact record for them. So we'll invite them to the portal versus having them register themselves. So in terms of invitation code, or in terms of registration, this is like almost every portal needs to consider this scenario. You need to have a solve for this. Unless your portal is absolutely net new, like net new version of Dataverse, you need to do this. But even if that's the case, going forward, often there's still almost always a need to be handling invitation codes. Now, there is an alternative to invitation codes, and it's called contact mapping with email. So instead of invitation codes, if your identity provider includes email information as part of the token, as part of the claim, Power Pages can automatically associate the login credentials. So you can kind of think of it as the user can almost use their email address as the invitation code. So now again, this requires that the identity provider provides the email information in the token. That's not always as obvious as you like. The answer, that being yes, is like you'd think that like, oh, that I put in my email address to get my Google account. That doesn't mean that the email address is going to be in the token. So you need to kind of verify that that's in place. But I know that this can often get identified as a bit of a security hole if you have this contact mapping with email enabled, because you're placing a high degree of trust with that identity provider that it's validated, or that you can trust that the email address that's coming in is actually from that user. Because imagine a scenario where I created an identity provider that didn't validate an email address. So I could just create my account with any email address that hadn't validated that I own that email address. If I could do that and then log into your site, I'm now able to claim that contact for that email address that I may not own. So if you are going to take advantage of this contact mapping with email, it's sometimes seen as an easy way to do it. You need to make sure that you have a very high level of trust with the IDP, and that IDP is validating the ownership of that email. In that case, if you're in certain kind of very kind of trusted environments where it's like, hey, we got this IDP, it's already set up. Other projects have already made sure that yes, they're the people who they say they are. And rather than invitation codes, we can just rely on that high level of trust in Power Pages. This is a great fit. It's not as great of a fit for just like, hey, we're just kind of too lazy to do invitation codes. We'll just kind of map them with their email addresses. Again, you just have to make sure that somewhere in this chain, the ownership of that email address has been validated. Otherwise, it's not good. You're gonna open it up so that people can claim accounts that shouldn't be there. So something to keep in mind. Certainly an option, but there's just that kind of that high level of trust that you need to have with those IDPs to make sure that you're allowing them to claim. Again, it depends on what do you get access to when you actually log in, right? If your portal has sensitive, financial information, healthcare information, and you're allowing someone to log in just based on the fact that they were able to create an account with that email address, you have to be very sure that you've validated some way that is who they say they are. So something to keep in mind, but it is another option in terms of user registration is instead of invitation codes, you can use the email address instead. Okay, so let's talk about this challenge, the kind of what I see as the number one challenge, because in terms of the registration flow of in Power Pages, because the most common scenario that I see is we use invitation codes for almost all users to get access to the portal. Again, the situation is people are often contacts in Dataverse long before we want to give them access to the portal. So whether it's the launch of a portal, we're going to invite them, or say it's a customer service portal. Okay, they're going to come in as a lead. Eventually, it's like, hey, we want you to have access to our portal. We'll send you an invite. So this whole process, we're going to send them. We're going to assume that we're almost always going to have, an existing contract record, and we want to invite them into the portal. Now, again, if you're following best practice and not using local auth, unfortunately, the flow that the user gets with an invitation code isn't ideal, and there's kind of ways to smooth it out a bit. You can make it super smooth with kind of a lot of custom development, but I think there's just a few small little things you can do that makes like the no code out of the box experience even a little bit better. But so the challenge is that from Power Pages perspective, there's no when it's working with an external identity provider. So let's assume you're using Entra External ID. So when you click the sign in link at the top in the top right hand corner of your Power Pages site, you click sign in, it's taken you to the sign in page. It asks for your username and password. And that's the experience that most people, after they've already logged in once they've registered, that's what they'd expect. You click the sign in link, put in your username and password, boom, you get into the portal. The challenge with Power Pages and how it works with these identity providers is that there's no way to distinguish between, is this a user accepting an invitation code, or is this a user just signing in for normal? So either way, when you're redirected to the sign in page, when you're redirected to that identity provider, you see the sign in page. So imagine you're a user, and here I'll just kind of step through this. So imagine you're a user, you've received an email that says, hey, come register for, come sign into our new portal. Here's this invitation code. So you click the link and you're taken to a page that looks something like this. This is what the invitation redemption page looks like. So you see this, you got your invitation code, you click the register button, and you're taken to this. And you're like, sign in to, wait, what am I signing into? Like, I thought I'm signing up for this account. I don't actually want to sign in. And now it's asking me for my email address. Like, didn't you send me an email? Why do I have to give you my email address? What actually the user needs to do here is they need to click that no account, create one, because the user, this experience isn't just the sign in, it's called the sign up or sign in. And so for the invitation code process, you want them to sign up generally. They may not have account. In some cases where you have an IDP where the user already has their credentials there, that's different. They can just put in their credentials and away they go. But in most cases, if you're using Entra External ID, you're using local accounts within Entra External ID, you're expecting the user to click that no account, create one link. And then they go through the process of giving their user their email address. They're going to validate it. They're going to put in their password and go through that whole process. But this is the confusing part of the process is the user gets to this page. Okay, this is fine. They click register. They get here, and then they are absolutely lost. They don't understand that they're supposed to click no account, create one. So in our experience, customizing those pages and just making sure that you're educating the user in the messaging of the email to say, hey, you're gonna see this screen, you're gonna see this screen, make sure you click this link. And what we do, especially in B2C back in the day, we would customize the entire B2C page, and like right below that link, we would have like a big area that says, hey, are you accepting an invitation code? Big arrow, click this link. Again, is it ideal? No, but it really kind of drove down the number of people who actually were confused. There's probably a few like, oh, like why do I have to do this? But at least they weren't emailing someone to be like, I'm confused. It's like, okay, now I get it. So we are allowing the users to kind of help themselves. So it's really important in those cases that you're using messaging in the invitation emails themselves on the sign up page to help the user. So on this page, again, you can kind of customize it to say, oh, like, are you getting a new account? Click the button, click the no account, create one thing here, or kind of customize this page a little bit. So when you're doing that, if you are using an external identity provider and invitation codes, that's the big downside. I provide that feedback to Microsoft kind of all the time. Like, can't we clean up this experience? Like, there's technical ways that you could have it go directly to a sign up page. May not always be ideal, but like, is there a way we can clean up this experience so that it's a little more intuitive to users? So something to just kind of consider. I did want to touch on web roles and kind of how those are handled in kind of some of the different options. So when it comes to open registration, if you have a user that just kind of logs in, they create their blank contact, they get their contact record isn't associated to any web roles. They will get the authenticated user's web role because everyone who logs in will get that. But if that's the process you're going to go with, consider processes like Power Automate to add additional web roles if necessary. With invitation codes, one of the things, there are more features to invitation codes than just associated in the login. You can have it run a classic workflow once it's been accepted, and you can have it associate web roles as part of that process too. So just something to consider is like, not only are we registering users, but in some cases you may need to assign them additional web roles. And so invitation codes give you that. Open registration out of the box doesn't have any, like, people who go through open registration won't get anything other than the authenticated user web roles, because that's what everyone gets. So those are kind of the out of the box user registration experiences. Again, in my experience, the most common out of the box way we do it is you're using invitation codes and you're using an external identity provider, and you're kind of going through that flow that I just kind of showed you. Now, that's not going to work for everyone, and there are alternatives. I'll talk about kind of 3 alternatives here kind of quickly. So the first one, I do have a whole kind of blog series on this. It's so old, it's the blog post refers to Dynamics 365 portals. So I think this is probably from, I don't know, 2018, 2019. Like, this one's an old one. But honestly, like, I don't know that anything about this process has really changed. And the idea here is that rather than rely on any of the things that I just, well, not, you rely on invitation codes, but the actual registration process is create your own kind of custom table, call it portal user registration. Ask the user for first name, last name, whatever information you want to gather about them, because you'll notice with open registration, the user didn't have to provide any details. They just had to log in. If they're using local auth, again, the details that we capture from them are quite limited. Username, email address, password, that's it. Some organizations have requirements around, hey, I want to be able to like provide first name, last name. There's all these details that I need before I'd even consider letting them access my site. So what you do is you create a table that gathers all that information, allow anonymous users to submit essentially a request to get in. That request is received. You can either process it automatically using Power Automate. You can process it manually using a model-driven app. And then you can have things like Power Automate generate the contact record and do all the work, and then send them an invitation code once they're approved. So that is, I would say, the second most common way we do it. If they don't want to do invitation codes and they want a true user registration process, it's by creating a custom table using the forms functionality in Power Pages to get a user to submit essentially a registration form, and then using Power Automate to process that and then send an invitation and let them kind of go through that process. Often we'll see they'll say, hey, they have to provide proof that they're allowed to access this website. They have to give us their membership number, any of those types of things. All of that can be validated once you accept. They submit they put in their submission. We run the code to we run the Power Automate flow to like, yeah, okay, no, their name matches these other records we have. If we can create a contact record for them or join them with an existing one and send it out. So that is something that's possible. Now, another alternative is lots of the identity providers have a registration process built in. So if you look at something like Azure AD B2C or Entra External ID, they will have their own way to like, hey, I can ask from their first name and last name, and you can kind of create a registration form on that side. And then you can use a functionality called registration claims mapping. So the way that works is, if on the identity provider side, the user, when they signed up to create their login credentials and other details they may have provided over there, you can set it up so that those other details, like say first name, last name, are included in the information passed back to Power Pages. Then you use this claims mappings to say, okay, this claim that I've received, so the first name goes into this field in the contact record, last name goes into this field, and basically you can map it so that when the user signs in, and you can have both when they first register and every time they sign in, you can basically synchronize information over from the identity provider. So sometimes the identity provider, especially more kind of sophisticated ones like say Okta, or if you're starting to get into like custom policies with B2C or those types of things, you can build a whole kind of complex registration experience on that side, and then pass that information over to Power Pages using claims within the tokens, and then setting up those claims mappings so that when you sign in or when you register, that data is saved to Dataverse. So that's another popular option for how to handle kind of a registration experience, is you're kind of delegating all that responsibility to the identity provider, and then you're often using open registration because you're saying, hey, we're doing all the work to make sure they are who they say they are over there. If they can sign in over there, we trust them, and then once they're into Power Pages, we're good. Another alternative, and is the situation where you may run into a project where people already exist in the identity provider. Maybe you've used Entra External ID or Azure AD B2C on other projects, and you want to include that into a new Dataverse project, or it's a new portal within Dataverse, but the contacts already exist. It's totally okay to create those external identity records yourself. So if you want to have some sort of automatic way to just create that external identity that links the contact to their login credentials, you absolutely can create those external identity records kind of manually yourself through a script or whatever. You can kind of bulk create them. So if you already control both sides of the equation and the people already exist in the identity provider, and you can avoid the complexities of the invitation code process by just figuring it out yourself and creating those external identity records yourself. External identity, that's just a table in Dataverse. You can use the Dataverse API to kind of do whatever you want with it. You could access it with Power Automate. You can do all sorts of fun things with data flows, that sort of stuff. All that is possible with that external identity table. So if you already have a bunch of the information from your external identity provider, then you could consider just creating those external identity records yourself. Okay. So I just want to just one last slide in terms of like best practices. So again, use an external identity provider. Don't use localauth unless you really, don't use localauth. Let's leave it at that. If you're going to be using that kind of, to me, what's the most traditional flow in terms of invitation codes with an external identity provider, just really try to reduce that confusion by improving that messaging in the invitation email that goes out and in the sign-in page, and avoid open registration if you can. Certainly if you're going to have it on, make sure it's a conscious decision and you have that kind of that justification as to why you need to use open registration. Don't accidentally leave it on because you didn't realize it. Kind of start with it. Think of it's disabled unless we absolutely need it in this project. So those would be kind of the best practices that I would kind of leave you with in terms of registration. So all right, in terms of just going to wrap up here, then we'll leave time for questions. So now's the time. If you've got questions, put them in the chat and or put them into the questions block, and I will get to them. Just finish up with some housekeeping items, and then I'll address any questions if we do have them there. So our next call will be May 14th, same time, same place. Thanks to our, the great support of Jason and his team at MS Dynamics World. We're going to keep this thing going as long as people seem to be interested and engaged. And I will say, we'll give it another 10 seconds here. I haven't seen any additional questions yet. So Jason, I think we could probably wrap it up there.
All right, we can do that. Thank you again, Nick, and thanks to everyone for being here. We have a recording we'll be sharing soon. So with that, I'll end the session. Bye, everyone.
Thanks all.